everyone. Let's get started with the Unit 6 key questions that have to do with the 1950s and the Cold War. Key question number 1 reads as follows. The Cold War begins essentially after World War II. How do the following terms or ideas fit into the Cold War? Capitalism and democracy versus socialism and communism, and satellite nations and containment. All right, so the first part of that was how do socialism and communism compare? What do they have to do with capitalism and democracy? So in the United States, we have a democracy. In the 1950s, we had a democracy, and we have capitalism. Whereas the Soviet Union was a socialist country, it was a communist government. So in the 1950s, any communist government really had strict rules and guidelines to follow. The government, the main government, the big government, had a lot of power. For the United States, it thought that this always took away freedoms of the people. So freedoms like democracy would vanish in a communist government. The opportunity to do specific jobs that you chose would vanish. They would be gone. So the United States and its people, more often than not, saw communism as restricting freedoms. Therefore, depending on the job that you had, you may not be able to work it, or voters would no longer be able to have power. All that you see right there, they wouldn't be able to vote people that they wanted in as president or as the leader of a country. Instead, it would be out of their hands. As for capitalism, I've already hit on this, but the idea of you in the United States, you get to work the job that you want to work, assuming that you have the qualifications for it, etc. That was non-existent in communism as far as the United States was concerned. Your job was to benefit the government and the people overall according to the government. So the idea of capitalism was out, and the central government, the main government of that country, would collect more money and then distribute money how it saw fit. As for the second part of the question, how are satellite nations and containment intertwined? Well, if you think about satellite nations, these nations that have been taken over by the Soviet Union, the eastern part of Europe, and there's containment, the idea that the United States does not want communism to spread any further than it already has. Well, the satellite nations are countries taken over by communism. That was the expansion of communism. The United States doesn't want this to continue. So that's how they are related, is the United States is stopping the spread of communism in Eastern Europe, preventing it from continuing into Western Europe. Key question number 2, what is the primary role of the Truman Doctrine, NATO, and the Marshall Plan? So we're going to start with the Truman Doctrine. The foremost purpose of the Truman Doctrine is to stop the spread of communism. So its goal is containment. In the Truman Doctrine, or what happens next with the Truman Doctrine, is the United States sends a bunch of money to Greece and Turkey because they are struggling. NATO, North Atlantic Treaty Organization. First thing you should know is what NATO stands for. And if you think about the geography of North Atlantic Treaty Organization, this is Western Europe, and then the United States is involved here. As the Soviet Union grows more powerful and the United States becomes more concerned with it, that's why NATO comes into existence, because this concern grows. And the basic premise here is, if the Soviet Union dares to attack one country in Western Europe, then all those countries are going to consider it an attack on themselves as well. The last one here, the Marshall Plan, the foremost purpose of this is to fight hunger and poverty and chaos and desperation in Western Europe. But the very close secondary purpose here is to once again stop the spread of communism. But there is a foremost purpose and a secondary purpose. Beyond that, the Marshall Plan sends out $13 billion to aid countries in Western Europe to help out after World War II and as the Cold War is getting underway. Key question number 3. Why was the Berlin airlift necessary? At least that's according to the United States. The key aspect here is West Berlin is surrounded by Soviet territory. So that's important to note. And then on top of that, West Berlin is occupied by the British, the French, and the United States. So why does it even come around? It's because the Soviet Union is going to blockade all entrances into West Berlin. And this is post-World War II. So West Berlin is relying on the United States, the British, the French for things such as food and medicine. And if they all get blocked off by the Soviet Union, then they are they are in need of those goods. So it's necessary because that responsibility is there. The United States is one of those countries occupying it. So they go ahead and continue to make these flights in. And without these flights or without this Berlin airlift, then West Berlin would have ended up in the hands of the Soviet Union. Question number 4. Explain how Germany and Berlin become East and West Germany and East and West Berlin. For this, we're going with a very basic drawing here. Germany represented by this circle. This is Germany as a country itself. Then, when Germany loses World War II, Germany has this look. If we just pretend it's split down the middle, but there are 4 zones here. Britain has a zone, France has a zone, the United States has a zone, and the Soviet Union has a zone. Now, Britain, France, and the United States, they all team up and say, let's combine our zone into one, because post-World War II, they had the idea or the thought that they need to reintegrate. They need to be responsible for the reintegration of Germany into Europe, which the Treaty of Versailles did not do. This was determined at the Yalta Conference. The Soviet Union, however, they really were looking for some payback. They didn't like how they were treated in World War II, and for good reason, but they did not have the same mentality as the other 3. So the other 3 combine into one, and sure enough, Germany then becomes a West Germany, and Soviet Union is going to occupy what becomes East Germany. And that's how you get West and East Germany. Berlin is much the same way. The Yalta Conference divides Germany into 4 zones. Well, the Yalta Conference divided Berlin into 4 zones. So if Berlin is this circle here, it's divided into the 4 zones. 3 of the zones have the same thought process on reintegration, so they combine into one. That forms West Berlin. The Soviet Union is the other part of Berlin, and that becomes the East Berlin. Key question number 5. Draw the Berlin Wall accurately. Meaning, when looking up from above the city, where would you see the outline of the wall? So here is the entire city of Berlin, west and east. Where would the Berlin Wall fall? Take a moment, pause the video, and come up with your response. Now that you've put some thought into that, I'm going to go ahead and move through a couple more slides to give some clues as to where the Berlin Wall would actually be located. First clue is this. All around East and West Berlin is East Germany, which is occupied by the Soviet Union. So everything around the city is communist. Where does the wall fall? Does it help you make any of that decision? The next thing to keep in mind is East Berlin is also communist and taken over by the Soviet Union. So knowing that, where do you think the Berlin Wall falls? All right, time to share. Did you have this? Did you have the area here and around West Berlin as to where the wall falls? This is where the Berlin Wall is located. Right? The purpose is that with time, people in East Berlin are struggling, people in East Germany are struggling, and they are looking to get out of this Soviet occupied territory. So they're going to West Berlin. Once in West Berlin, they make their way out and go to West Germany. But the Soviet Union does not like this, so they put a wall around West Berlin to make it very difficult for someone, for example, in East Berlin, trying to get to the west. Key question number 6. What is HUAC? Let's keep in mind a couple of things. It's an acronym, so you should know what it stands for. House of Un-American Activities Committee. That's the first thing to keep in mind. Secondly, it's in the early 1950s, late 40s, so this is during the time of the Red Scare. And un-American at this time would definitely mean it's related to communism. So what does this committee do? It's going to try and shut down activities that are involved with communism. That's what it tries to do. But the importance behind it is beyond just what it does. It is going to investigate and shut down activities that it believes to be involved in communism, and it will do this at any cost. So it can ruin people's lives, it can accuse people of communism, even if they are truly not communists, and they would argue it's okay. Why? Because we're doing this really American thing by trying to shut down communists. Key question number 7, very similar to key question number 6. Explain the good, at least why some people think it would be good, and the bad of McCarthyism. So in general, McCarthyism is not a good thing. McCarthyism is spearheaded, or what becomes known as McCarthyism is based on what Joseph McCarthy does. He is a staunch anti-communist, somebody that does not like communism whatsoever. He, because of his efforts trying to hunt down communists, is considered very patriotic. That would be considered the good part. He's trying to represent his country. He seeks out communists and tries to convict them of doing things that are not in the best interest of the country. The problem, and definitely the bad thing here, is Joseph McCarthy is going to seek convictions of people, but it does not matter if he has evidence or not. So he will do this without evidence, or wherever evidence is needed, he will change it up, or he will doctor it to make it look like somebody truly is involved with communism. This is a time where the Red Scare is happening, and people who are associated or become associated with being communists are outcast by society. So the problem here is that if you are accused of being communist by someone like Joseph McCarthy, or anyone for that matter, it ruins people's lives. If you have a business and you're accused of being communist, other people don't want to be accused of being communist as well, so they stop using your business, and that individual goes out of business, can't pay rent, has lots of other problems, and their lives are ruined in that sense. Key question number 8. What is the Soviet Union's response to NATO? Explain its purpose. So keep in mind what NATO is. NATO is what? Come up with that answer. NATO stands for North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Then we have to remember what it actually is and what it does. It's a self-defense mechanism to protect Western European nations, Canada and the US, from being attacked by the Soviet Union. If one of these countries is attacked, then they all consider themselves attacked. That's kind of that key phrase that you want to remember with NATO. Finally, the Soviet Union responds with its own pact, the Warsaw Pact. If the United States, if the Soviet Union is attacked, of course it considers itself an attack on the Soviet Union. However, if any of the Eastern European satellite nations are attacked, then the Soviet Union is going to consider it an attack on itself, and therefore the United States and other nations would find itself at war, just the same as if the Soviet Union attacked a NATO country. Key question number 9. Explain the housing crisis, the response, and what impact it had on cities, automobiles, the interstate highway system. And there's actually more we'll see in this. But at the end of World War II, families are reunited. People come back home and, hey, family, I see ya. So what do you do when you haven't seen somebody for a long time and they were in a dangerous situation? Well, you make babies. So the baby boom happens. But when you start getting larger number of people in these small, crowded living spaces, then there's a housing crisis and you need bigger houses. So there's a search for bigger houses, but houses take time to build. And they can't be built in cities. There's no room. Things are already tight and crammed in cities. So at this time, suburbs are going to be created. And that's because of Levitt towns. You get these cookie cutter houses. Back in the 1920s, we know about the assembly line. You make all parts the same and then you build houses. Well, this is now happening with building houses. You have all these houses that look the same and are built, but they're built quickly and they look the same because the parts are the same. So houses are going to be built much more quickly. Then you need people to afford the houses. So it's going to be the middle class white people in the cities, and they flee out to the surrounding areas of the cities, and suburbs are created. Okay, those who leave still have jobs in the cities. So even though they left the cities as far as where they live, they need to still get access or have access to the cities for their jobs. Okay, but that access requires a need for a few things, one of which is automobiles. So if there's now a greater need for automobiles, then automobiles are going to increase in number because their importance has been increased. And then there's a need to have better access, and that's where the interstate highway system, which comes around in the mid 1950s, is going to help out. Then we need to take a look at the repercussions or the results of all these middle class people leaving the cities and going to the suburbs. Well, people are not, the tax revenue is now being collected in the suburbs instead of in the cities. So tax money goes down, which means public services are going to be hurt by it. So keep in mind what public services are. This is going to be services like schools and your police and your firemen. Those are things that are going to lose out because tax revenue is down. So who are left in the cities that are going to be impacted by white flight? It's going to be a lot of minorities in the cities. Think about the Great Migration from the Roaring Twenties unit. A lot of African Americans moving out of the South and going into northern cities. Well, they're in cities, and they are going to be, they will not be a part of the white flight into the suburbs. Additionally, anybody who that is poor and doesn't have the resources to go to the suburbs, well, they're going to remain in the cities as well, and they will be impacted by the lack of tax revenue. Key question number 10 will not be addressed on this test. Rather, that'll have a much bigger role in the next unit that we take, next unit we have. And then key question number 11, who are these teenagers? Exactly who are they? And what do they do? So for this, you really need to go into modules and go to the reading popular culture and check out pages 7 and 8. There's 7 and 8 on the Canvas part, but on the text, it says pages 658 and 659. So the creation of the term is discussed there, and how teenager has not been this term that's been around forever. Rather, it comes about in the 1950s. Education, teenagers are going to be going to school at higher rates than ever. So, why is that? And then pop culture, what are teenagers doing? How do they spend their time? Well, drive-in movie theaters, they're listening to different types of music, and one type very in particularly. And then what are teenagers buying? How are they spending whatever money they might actually have? And that should say key question number 12, but that will also not be addressed on this test. That's it. If you have any questions, let me know. See you later. Bye bye.